water is black at 90 feet. Not dark, black. The kind of darkness that swallows your dive light 3 feet from your mask and gives nothing back. Jake Mercer has been doing this for 17 years, inspecting pier pilings and bridge footings in harbors up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and he's learned to trust his hands more than his eyes. Today, those hands are telling him something is wrong. He's supposed to be checking the concrete foundation of Pier 7, looking for cracks or erosion that might compromise the structure. Standard work. Routine. Except his glove just hit something that shouldn't be there. Something massive and angular, buried under what feels like 3 feet of mud and the accumulated garbage of 6 decades. He clears away a handful of silt, and his light catches the edge of something metallic. Then another edge. Parallel lines. Too precise to be natural, too big to be debris. Jake keys his radio. Surface. I've got something down here, not sure what yet. The response crackles back, distorted by depth and distance. He doesn't wait for instructions. He's already clearing more mud, working methodically, the way you do when you're 90 feet down and every movement costs air. His hands trace the outline of what feels like a cylinder, then another, and another. 8 of them, arranged in a line, each one the diameter of a dinner plate. It takes him 20 minutes to clear enough material to understand what he's found. When recognition finally comes, it hits him like a physical thing. These aren't just cylinders. They're cylinder heads. He's looking at an engine, a massive diesel engine, lying on its side in the mud like a sleeping giant, encrusted with barnacles and rust and the biological debris of decades underwater. The thing must weigh 4 tons, maybe more, and it's been down here so long that the harbor has tried to digest it, covering it in layers of sediment and shell until it became part of the bottom itself. Back on the surface, Jake pulls his dive logs and cross-references them with harbor records. The location matches a notation from 1962. Obstruction reported. Salvage not economical. That's bureaucratic language for, we know something sank here, but we're not paying to bring it up. Further digging through maritime archives reveals the rest of the story. The SS Harbor Maid, an 85-foot tugboat built in 1947, went down during a November storm. Winds hit 60 miles per hour that night, pushing 12-foot swells into a harbor that wasn't designed to handle them. The boat took water over the stern, listed hard to port, and sank in less than 4 minutes. The 3-man crew made it off. The boat didn't make it back. The engine Jake found is a Fairbanks Morse opposed piston diesel, almost certainly a 38 D818 series. 8 cylinders. Somewhere north of 1,000 horsepower when it was new. These engines were legends in their time, the kind of machinery that men spoke about with something approaching reverence. Fairbanks Morse built them in Beloit, Wisconsin, starting in the 1930s, and they powered everything from submarines to generators to tugboats like the Harbor Maid. The opposed piston design was unusual. 2 pistons per cylinder moving toward each other, meeting in the middle where combustion happened. No cylinder head, no valves in the traditional sense. Just brutal, elegant simplicity. The kind of engineering that said, this will work, and it will work forever. During World War II, these engines went into Gatto-class submarines, running submerged for weeks at a time, breathing recycled air and burning whatever fuel the Navy could source. They powered Coast Guard cutters through North Atlantic ice. They ran generators in Pacific Island bases where replacement parts arrived by ship once every 6 months, if at all. The military trusted them because they had no choice. Failure at sea meant death, and Fairbanks Morse engines didn't fail. After the war, they found their way into civilian service. Tugboats, fishing trawlers, stationary power plants in towns too remote for grid electricity. They ran on diesel, heavy fuel oil, even kerosene in a pinch. And they ran for decades. The Harbor Maid's engine was installed in April 1951. According to a brass plate Jake finds bolted to the engine block once he clears away enough growth to read it. The engraving is still legible, protected by a thin layer of verdigris. Installed by Chief Engineer Robert Callahan, April 14, 1951. 11 years of service before the storm took the boat down. 62 years underwater after that. And now, impossibly, Jake is about to discover that those 62 years haven't killed it. He brings down a 3-foot pipe wrench on his next dive, the kind of tool that weighs 15 pounds in air and feels like nothing underwater. He fits it onto the crankshaft pulley, rusted but still recognizably round, and pulls. Nothing. He repositions, braces his fins against the engine block and pulls harder. Still nothing. Then, just as he's about to give up, he feels it. Movement. Not much. A quarter inch, maybe less. But movement. The crankshaft is turning. Jake surfaces and makes a call. Within a week, he's got a team assembled. A marine salvage engineer, a diesel mechanic who worked on Fairbanks Morse engines in the 1970s, and a structural engineer to figure out how to lift 4.5 tons of cast iron off the harbor floor without dropping it or killing anyone in the process. They bring down hydraulic tools, the kind used to free seized industrial machinery, and they work in shifts because nobody can stay at 90 feet long enough to do this in one go. When they finally get the crankshaft to rotate a full revolution, the diesel mechanic, a man named Tom who's 67 and hasn't seen one of these engines in 40 years, surfaces with his eyes wide behind his mask. "It's got compression," he says, and his voice has the quality of someone reporting a miracle. "I felt it. The pistons are sealing. This shouldn't be possible." 62 years underwater should have turned the engine into a solid block of corrosion, every moving part fused to every other moving part, the whole thing reduced to an iron sculpture of what it used to be. But it hasn't. Something about the conditions down there, the cold water, the anaerobic mud, the specific chemistry of that particular spot on the harbor floor, has preserved it. Not perfectly. The exterior is a ruin, covered in rust and barnacles and the calcified remains of marine life. But inside, where it matters, the engine is still an engine. The explanation, when it comes from a marine archaeologist they consult, is both simple and profound. Oxygen is what kills metal. Oxygen plus water equals rust, and rust is iron oxide, which is just iron that's been chemically destroyed. But down in the mud, sealed away from the water column, there's almost no oxygen. The environment is anaerobic, the same condition that preserves shipwrecks and ancient artifacts. The mud became a tomb, and tombs preserve things. Add to that the residual lubrication, heavy marine grease and diesel fuel that coated every internal surface when the engine was running, and you've got a protective barrier that's lasted 6 decades. The cold water helped too. At 40 degrees Fahrenheit, chemical reactions slow to a crawl. Corrosion that might take 5 years in warm, oxygenated water takes 50 years in cold mud. But there's another factor, one that the archaeologist mentions almost as an afterthought. The engine was built to a different standard. The cast iron block is thick, with walls that would be considered wastefully heavy by modern manufacturing standards. The crankshaft is forged steel, not cast, which means it's denser and more resistant to corrosion. The tolerances are loose by today's standards, clearances measured in thousandths of an inch where modern engines use 10,000ths, but that looseness means there's room for a little rust, a little wear, without the whole thing seizing up. This engine was built in an era when good enough meant we'll outlast the boat it's installed in, and probably the next boat too. Tom, the diesel mechanic, puts it differently. They built these things for the end of the world, he says. Nuclear war, infrastructure collapse, whatever. The idea was that if civilization fell apart, you could pull one of these out of a barn somewhere, pour in some fuel, and it would run. Looks like they were right. The question now is whether it can run again. Not just turn over by hand, but actually fire, actually produce power, actually do the thing it was designed to do 73 years ago. The team debates this for weeks. On one side are the preservationists, who argue that the engine is a historical artifact now, a museum piece, and attempting to run it risks destroying it. On the other side are the enthusiasts, who argue that an engine that doesn't run is just a sculpture, and these machines were built to work. Silence, they say, is death. The compromise is this: they'll restore it to demonstration status. That means a complete disassembly, cleaning, inspection, and reassembly with new gaskets and seals. They'll get it to the point where it can run, but they won't run it under load. No propeller, no generator, no work. Just combustion, just proof that the thing still remembers how to be an engine. The estimated cost is $100,000. The estimated time is 2,000 hours. Nobody on the team is getting paid. The extraction happens on a cold morning in March. A crane barge positions itself over the site, and divers attach lifting straps to the engine block. Hydraulic airbags are inflated underneath, breaking the suction of the mud. When the crane takes the weight, there's a moment where nothing happens. The engine has been down there so long that the harbor doesn't want to let go. Then slowly, it breaks free. The ascent takes 20 minutes, controlled and careful, the engine rising through the water column like something being born. When it breaks the surface, water streams off it in sheets, and the crowd that's gathered on the pier, word has gotten out, goes silent. It's massive. It's ruined. It's magnificent. On the dock, under bright work lights, the team begins the assessment. Pressure washing removes the worst of the biological growth, revealing metal underneath that's pitted and scarred but structurally intact. They insert a borescope, a flexible camera, into the cylinders and project the image onto a laptop screen. The cylinder walls show scoring, the kind of wear you'd expect from 11 years of hard use, but there's no catastrophic damage. No cracks, no holes, no evidence that water penetrated the combustion chambers. The crankshaft journals are measured with micrometers, and the readings come back within 10,000ths of an inch of factory specification. For a crankshaft that's been underwater for 62 years, this is remarkable. For a crankshaft that's 73 years old, it's almost unbelievable. The verdict: restorable. The work begins in a warehouse donated by a local maritime museum. The team expands as word spreads. Retired machinists show up, men in their 60s and 70s who worked in shipyards and engine shops and factories that don't exist anymore. They bring tools, micrometers and dial indicators and torque wrenches, and they bring knowledge. One of them, a man named Eddie, who's 72, tells Jake that his father was a Fairbanks Morse factory representative in the 1950s, traveling to shipyards to oversee installations and train mechanics. He always said these engines were the best thing the company ever made, Eddie says. Better than the locomotives, better than the generators. He said if you treated them right, they'd run forever. Guess he wasn't exaggerating. The disassembly is painstaking. Every bolt is documented, every part photographed and tagged. Some components come apart easily, the threads still clean under their coating of grease. Others require heat, penetrating oil, and patience. The first piston to come out is a revelation. It's scored, yes, and the rings are stuck in their grooves, but it's intact. The second piston is the same, so is the third. By the time they've removed all 16 pistons, 2 per cylinder, the team is starting to believe that this might actually work. The fuel system is the biggest challenge. The injectors are seized solid, the internal components fused by corrosion and deposits. Modern ultrasonic cleaning tanks aren't big enough, so they improvise, building a heated bath using a livestock watering trough and industrial ultrasonic transducers. The injectors soak for 48 hours, the ultrasonic waves shaking loose decades of accumulated crud. When they finally disassemble the first injector, they find that the needle valve, the precision component that meters fuel into the cylinder, is still within specification. Worn, but usable. It's another small miracle in a process that's full of them. Parts that can't be salvaged are machined from scratch. A local technical college gets involved, and students use the project as a learning opportunity, cutting new gaskets from sheet material and fabricating brackets and fittings that haven't been manufactured since the 1960s. The work is slow, meticulous, and utterly absorbing. Men who haven't touched a wrench in years find themselves spending evenings in the warehouse, lapping valves and measuring bearing clearances and arguing about torque specifications. It's not just restoration, it's resurrection. 6 months after the engine came out of the water, it's ready. They've mounted it on a steel test stand, connected it to a temporary fuel tank, and rigged up a starter motor salvaged from a diesel generator. The fuel is modern ultra-low sulfur diesel, cut with additives to boost lubricity and cetane rating, bringing it closer to the heavy fuel oil the engine was designed to burn. The oil is straight SAE 40, the same weight that would have been used in 1951. Everything is as close to original as they can make it, except cleaner. The first start attempt is scheduled for a Saturday morning, and 200 people show up to watch. Among them are 3 generations of the Callahan family. Robert Callahan, the chief engineer who installed the engine in 1951, died in 1989, but his son is here, and his grandson, and his great-granddaughter, who's 7 years old, and doesn't quite understand why everyone is so excited about an old engine. The museum has set up folding chairs and a PA system. There are fire extinguishers stationed every 10 feet, and a paramedic crew on standby, because nobody is quite sure what's going to happen when they try to start a diesel engine that's been silent since 1962. Tom, the diesel mechanic, takes charge of the procedure. First, pre-lubrication, An electric pump circulates oil through the engine for 30 minutes, filling every gallery and coating every bearing surface. They're not taking chances. Next, a compression check. Each cylinder is tested individually, and the readings are surprisingly consistent, within 10% of each other, which is better than some running engines achieve. Then the fuel system is primed, hand-pumping diesel through the lines until it appears at each injector. Everything is ready. Tom hits the starter button. The engine turns over, slow and heavy, the starter motor straining against compression that hasn't been released in 6 decades. 1 revolution, 2, 3. No ignition. He releases the button, checks the fuel pressure, adjusts the timing slightly. Second attempt. The starter engages again, and this time on the 4th revolution there's a sound. A single sharp crack, like a gunshot. 1 cylinder has fired. Black smoke puffs from the exhaust stack. The crowd murmurs. Tom makes another adjustment, increasing fuel pressure slightly, and tries again. 3rd attempt. The starter turns the engine through 1 revolution, then 2, and then 3 cylinders catch simultaneously. The engine shudders, coughs, and runs. It's not smooth. There's a miss, a hesitation, something not quite right, but it's running. For 8 seconds, the Fairbanks Morse diesel that spent 62 years underwater produces power. Then Tom shuts it down, not wanting to push their luck. The crowd erupts. People are cheering, some are crying, and the Callahan family is on their feet, applauding an engine that their grandfather installed 73 years ago. It's not a complete success. The engine needs more work, better fuel atomization, possibly new injectors, definitely more tuning, but it's proof of concept. It's proof that the thing still knows how to be an engine, that somewhere in the metal and the machinery, the memory of combustion remains. Tom, wiping oil off his hands, says it best. That sound, that's 1951 talking to 2024. The engine finds a permanent home in the Maritime Museum of Industrial Heritage, mounted on a display stand in the main gallery. Visitors can hand crank the engine, disconnected from fuel and ignition, and feel the compression, the resistance, the mechanical reality of what it means to move 16 pistons through 8 cylinders. Educational programs use it to teach students about engineering principles that don't change: thermodynamics, materials science, the relationship between design and durability. And every few months the museum fires it up for a demonstration run, just long enough to prove that it still can. But the engine is more than a museum piece. It's a question, posed in cast iron and forged steel. What are we building today that will last 70 years? What will survive us? The Harbor Maid's engine was built in an era when craftsmanship meant something, when a mechanic put his name on his work because his reputation depended on it. Robert Callahan installed that engine in 1951, and 73 years later, it still carries his name. How many things can we say that about now? There's a broader story here, one that extends beyond a single engine in a single harbor. Maritime archaeologists estimate that there are thousands of similar artifacts resting on seafloors around the world. Engines, machinery, entire ships, all of them time capsules waiting to be opened. Each one represents a moment in history, a snapshot of technology and craftsmanship and human ambition. Some will be recovered, studied, preserved. Most will remain where they are, slowly dissolving into the ocean, their stories untold. Jake Mercer still dives the harbor, still inspects pier pilings and bridge footings, still works in darkness and cold and zero visibility. But he's not just a maintenance diver anymore. He's a finder of lost things, a keeper of stories. And he knows that somewhere below, in the black water and the mud, more stories are waiting. Engines that still have compression, ships that still have cargo, lives that still have names. All of them silent, all of them patient, all of them waiting for someone to reach down through the darkness and bring them back to light. The Harbor Maid's engine ran for 11 years, sank for 62, and came back. It's a story about durability, about engineering, about the things we build and the things that outlast us. But more than that, it's a story about memory. The memory encoded in metal, in design, in the careful work of men who built things to last. That memory survived the storm, survived the decades, survived the harbor itself. And now, in a museum in a city that's forgotten most of its maritime past, it speaks. Not loudly, not often, but when it does, it says something worth hearing. Some things are built to never die. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next deep dive into forgotten history. Drop a like if you appreciate engineering that refuses to quit, and leave a comment telling us what piece of old-school machinery you wish they still made today. We read every single one.